Hello, YouTube. Um, by now you've heard that Kevin Samuels died yesterday. That seems to be confirmed. And I'm not here to reiterate what everyone else is saying, which is that he's passed. No, that's kind of old hat. Part of what I wanted to do was not so much hold a memorial as try to encourage people in the online space who did know him well to share a bit more of their stories about him. Over the last couple of years, in particular in the manosphere, he's been a lightning rod. Most people in that space know who he is and have very strong opinions about him one way or the other. Average at best as an episode just had a it had a really profound impact on the conversations in the black community about dating and the situation of dating today and the problems with dating today. I think one of the things that was most interesting about it was that Kevin was the first person to really get heard saying, "Black women, you're not perfect either." And it was incredible to see the response because to points that he had made, over the years, he wasn't saying anything that other people weren't saying or believing. He was just someone who said it and got heard. And that was really his gift, was his ability to actually raise awareness of these issues that have existed for a long time. What I want to do today is not so much rehash things that everybody already knows. He's got extensive videos that you can go back and review at your leisure. I wanted to kind of do two things. One is I wanted to talk about my experience with the Kevin Samuels show and how the Kevin Samuels show helped me to kind of reframe my approach to life and dating. And also I'm hoping that this starts a trend so that other YouTubers who have much bigger platforms than mine and who've been impacted by Kevin can talk about the impact he had on them and their approach to their lives and their shows and their dating situations. I want his passing to be more than just a reaction video to other people, reiterating what we already know at this point, which is that he's passed. So let's try to honor him, the way I would hope to be honored at my passing, which is with people sharing stories about the impact that he had on their lives. And, in my case, the very positive benefit that his podcasts had on my perspective. First video I saw of Kevin Samuels was average at best. I specifically remember it because a friend of mine told me that Jemele Hill was reacting to something, I think on Twitter, essentially saying that she didn't really know how to feel about it. And I thought, I wonder what this topic is going to be. Pure clickbait curiosity. Now we dive into this show where, basically here's this guy, Kevin Samuels, seems to be talking to guys about how they can improve their, marketability by leveling up, and a woman interrupts his show. She's annoying him because she's disrupting what he's trying to do, and so he's just very straightforward with her. Kind of drop the tact, just the truth. You don't have to like it. She didn't like what he had to say. I mean, a lot of people didn't like what he had to say. But what he was saying was true. And that's the part that was so interesting and refreshing. He was saying something that was very true, and that I had just resigned myself to having to live with, but not really be able to change. I did feel like dating was a very unfair deal. Most of the women that I met were either coming in with kids or coming in with trauma from their past relationships that was suddenly my fault if I was trying to date them. And that was just the way it was. You had to, fix the broken pieces of someone else's life, largely at your own expense. And it didn't really seem to matter that, you wanted something different. That was how it was. But then things started to change. If you look at Average at Best, and you compare that to things that he has said since, Average at Best is pretty tame. It was the start of the conversation. Kind of like the couple who haven't been having that knockdown, drag out argument that they need to have. They've just been letting things get bottled up and crushed down until they reach that boiling point, and suddenly it all comes out. Average at Best started that. And I remember what happened for me. I saw that episode. I was fascinated. Who's this guy that just said all this stuff that I basically agree with? I need to know more about what's going on because this is fascinating. Now, this was me last year, so it's 2021. I was fortunate to have hours and hours of old Kevin Samuels material that I could just go back and review. Started with 15-minute clips, slowly progressed to watching whole shows. And yeah, to listen to him champion ideas that I and single guys I knew had and talked about amongst ourselves, but never felt like we could really discuss with women, with black women, was refreshing. Prior to Kevin Samuels, I spent a lot of time watching Karen comeuppance videos. The videos where, you see the Karen who is running her mouth and is basically trying to throw someone under the bus, and she gets caught on video and she gets whatever it is she deserves. She gets thrown in jail, or she gets slapped by the person she's intimidating. Basically she gets what she deserves. And those used to be very satisfying because for so long you had to deal with this whole notion of people using, basically privilege to their advantage because they weren't going to get caught. But now with cameras, they were. Kevin's show filled that void because now it was more personal, even more personal. Now it was black women who were being forced to acknowledge their role in some of the, the bad dating situations, some of the bad outcomes that they had. And seeing them get muted when they didn't want to stop and listen, seeing them be held, their feet held to the fire when they didn't want to deal with their roles in some of the messes they made, was incredibly satisfying. I'd listen to his videos and I would think, that's my ex-wife. That's this woman I used to date. That's this woman I'm going out with right now. Wow, this is This is the most exciting YouTube series I've ever seen. Part of what I really was fascinated by was the rationale of the women who I saw on the shows. Because what I was getting that I had never gotten before was insight into what they were thinking. So I was looking at these dating situations and seeing women who were basically saying they were with a guy because they couldn't do better. But they were in this relationship with one foot out the door. If something better came along, they were gone. Or they were in these relationships because these guys were fundamentally resources. They provided the finances, they provided the lifestyle, and it had nothing really to do with the man and everything to do with the bank account. While I was getting up to speed on Kevin Samuels, I was going out with a woman. Pretty, 2 kids, wasn't serious. But it suddenly became clear to me questions I needed to ask her. There were dots I was connecting that I hadn't thought about before because I had been resigned to this idea that this is just how dating is. This is just how dating black women is. Listening to other women talk about what was going on in their heads, I started to reevaluate that situation. So you know what? I'm a high earner. And if I really start to look at what's going on in this situation, what I suspect is this woman is hoping to marry a high earner who's going to take care of her and her kids. That was my suspicion. So while we had talked about, kind of dating casually and having fun, there were threads in her conversations that all started to line up. Threads where it seemed like she was trying to understand why relationships really didn't work nowadays, and wondered how much of it had to do with women's lib and women moving into the workforce, etc., etc. Seemed like a harmless musing before, but suddenly I thought, hang on. Are you looking to be a stay-at-home mom to take care of your kids with my money when we don't have kids together? Slowly as we talked, my approach to the conversations, to our interactions changed. Those joking musings about, marriage being a nice idea down the road, they changed into, marriage isn't necessarily something that I'm looking for. And it's not something that's on the table for someone who does not or is not going to have my kids. I mean, that was a very different position than I had taken with her. I was just very frank. Like, if you're really talking about marriage, I'm really letting you know that it's not going to happen. I'm not going to be stepdad to your 2 kids. Life partners, that's great. But my financial independence is paramount. My money takes care of me and my child. That subtle difference in our interaction, which was fundamentally the same. We were still going out to the same types of events. We're still having the same types of fun. But now it's clear. Like, I'm not going to marry you and take care of your 2 kids. Like, that's your responsibility and your ex's responsibility. And that was enough to end the relationship. She wasn't interested in that. She needed someone to basically be an ATM machine. Thank you, Kevin Samuels. In my subsequent interactions with women, it became much clearer to me that there were very specific things I was going to expect that I hadn't expected quite so clearly before. first and foremost, what I saw was that, the overwhelming majority of the women who were calling into Kevin's show wanted high earners. And high earners are rare. 10% of guys, roughly, make $100,000 a year or more. Factor out those who are, too old, or not single, or smoke, or, you name it. You're very quickly looking at one guy in 1,000, one guy in 10,000 who meet some of these women's criteria. And when you suddenly have the perspective that you're the one in 1,000, or maybe the one in 10,000 that they're looking for, well, then suddenly you say, wait a minute, if this is what you want, why am I jumping through all these hoops? Like, okay, you have expectations and you've listed them out. Well, I have expectations too, and here's what they are, and let's see what you think about those. And conversations changed, and my expectations got into things that were pretty basic. Things like, what positive things do you have to say about black men? I mean, sure, you got the stats on, the number who you think are incarcerated, or cheaters, or homosexual, or whatever it is. You've got a lot of negatives to say about black men. But what positives do you have to say? Are you an advocate for these men who you say you want? Or not? Are you a detractor? You see, Kevin came out and was broadly labeled as this misogynist, which, in fairness, was not an inaccurate description of his approach. But how often do you hear philogynist? We don't talk about that. That's not a very widely used term. When you look at what misogynist is to men, philogynist is to women. And there have been tons of philogynists out there. Free reign. Do what you want. Say what you want. No accountability. No one questioning what you're doing or trying to tear you down. A misogynist gets a voice, and suddenly people lose their minds. Listening to his show and getting a really clear sense for what women wanted, what they said they wanted, I made a concerted effort to get into better shape, to really focus more on my career than on relationships. Not to say I don't want them, but to realize that, the women out here are extremely picky. Extremely picky. So much so that as you see them age out, which is a tragedy, women who suddenly realize they can't have kids and kind of reflect on how picky they had been, it's harder to feel sorry for them. Because you look back and you say, it's your fault. No one was good enough for you. It's not that there weren't men, it's that you set standards that were well above what you deserved. The athletes and entertainers of the world want 10s. And if they're the only men who are good enough for you, well, what do you expect when you're a normal person? Coming out of the Kevin Samuel show, one of the things that I was most happy about was this. I developed a podcast. Not to compete with him, this was more of something I needed to do for me. Kevin was focusing on younger women who still had the opportunity to make good choices. His message was actually pretty simple. You can get the best husband possible if you start early. When you're 25 and you're beautiful and you don't have children, you are in one of the best positions possible to get the best husband possible. As you get older, as you have more life experiences, as you become more jaded, you start to lose options. The men you can get at 35 aren't as varied, aren't quite as interesting as the ones you could have gotten at 25 because of the way men choose. For me, his message was, pinpoint accurate. And I don't know many men who would disagree with what he was saying. Maybe they don't like the tone, but the message is dead on. But I thought, okay, what about these women who have gotten to the edge of the danger zone? 35 plus. Women who are generally more, in the category of who I date. What's the message to them? And I started building a channel really focused on that. Women 35 plus and the options they have, and kind of the practical standpoint, which is, you're 35. You're older. The men you're dating are older. It's time to kind of take some of the window dressing down and to start to say, what do you really want in a relationship? Do you want, a basketball player? At this point in your life, I'm assuming you've recognized that's not going to happen for you. So once you start to consider, where you are, who are the men who are appropriate for you? And what are you going to do about it? Because the wall is very real. The number of women who finally have a kid after 40 is almost zero. It's not a place where you want to be if you don't have to be there. And to the extent that, I can be a voice to challenge people to think about that and to potentially avoid disasters, that's what I'm going to try to do. So the moral of all of this is, let's try to use our platforms and our voices to celebrate the work that he did, to talk about the impact it's had on our lives, and to encourage more people to do the same. Because it's very easy to get focused on the couple of people out there who will say very, just very crass things, going after clickbait. It's very easy to get caught up in that. Let's rise above. Let's kind of flood the channel with the positives, flood the channel with the benefits, and really do, really honor the work that he was doing and the impact that he had.